Thanks for joining me today. I've been following and admiring the van life trend for a while, and I've been looking forward to getting into it in any way I can. When I was looking for a replacement vehicle, I test drove a Mazda5, and while I was there, stuck my bike in it to see if it fit. Not only did it fit the bike, it also fit my whole 6-foot 3-inch frame. Since that moment, I've been planning out all the details of this build. It started out on paper first, and eventually I made a Lego model to determine how the seat covers needed to hinge. I determined what kinds of cuts I needed to make the most efficient use of a single 3/4-inch 4x8 piece of plywood. For the entirety of the surfaces in the project, I used 23 30-seconds sanded pine plywood that I got for $50, topped with home and office indoor-outdoor carpet that was 50 cents a square foot. I purchased 5 linear feet of carpet, which totaled to 60 square feet and cost about $30. Cutting the carpet was easy and only required a sharp, standard utility knife blade. In the interest of avoiding excessively bulky corners, I cut out part of the inside of the fold of the carpet after stapling the corner to the wood. Overall, I found that starting by stapling the 4 corners of the board, then cutting and stapling the corners, then stapling the sides, worked the best and gave me the greatest flexibility in the corners. I used a manual heavy-duty staple gun with 1/2-inch 12mm Arrow 250 staples, and I had about a 60% chance of stapling a good staple, and the other 40% it folded on itself, but still stuck in the wood. From what I can tell, there doesn't seem to be a specific strategy that makes the staples go in or not, so I just left them as they came out. For the hinges, my dad gave me an 80-inch length of piano hinge that I cut down with a hacksaw and his help. The best way we found to cut it was for Dad to pinch the hinge between 2 pieces of wood. I cut at the segments and the hinges so there was a bit of a starting point for the blade. I cut the hinges for the folding panels 12 inches wide. I found that they only had 3 holes per side and drilled a 4th for each hinge. In the interest of avoiding any splitting, I pre-drilled every hole for the hinge. Then drilled in small screws, making sure they were short enough to not poke out the other side. Thankfully, all my measurements were good, and everything but the rear panel fit perfectly. However, it was not until a while later I realized that I failed to cut the seat covers narrow enough. My bike was not able to fit in the back when everything was in the daily use position. To mount the main platform to the folded down seats, I had removed the cargo ring holders and used the bolts to measure at the store to make sure I was getting the right size. They ended up measuring as M6 bolts. I used 80mm bolts since they were the shortest bolts I could buy that were larger than the 48mm space I needed to bridge, which accounted for the platform, the void between the platform and the beginning of the threads, and through the threads. Fortunately, the bolt holes go all the way through the seat, and the extra length was not problematic. To ensure the platforms are relatively rigid and supportive of my weight when I'm on them, I overlapped the end of the folding parts about 1 inch onto the platform created by the folded down rear seats. This ensures they aren't resting freely on their hinges in the extended position. On the sleeping platform on the passenger side, the lowest segment is the same size as the pieces on the driver's side, but the top segment is roughly 6 inches longer. It's about as easy as the other platform to fold up and down, and importantly to me, doesn't extend above the rear seats when the platforms are folded up. Trying to fit the shelf was a disaster. I took pieces of wood and tried to balance them freestanding in the car to get an idea of what I needed, but they kept toppling over and I ended up with very rough measurements. I decided to just go with what I could get and carpeted the legs with some of the leftover carpet. I used a narrow piece of carpet, then cut it to the length of the leg and just wrapped it around and stapled it. Again, I mounted everything using pre-drilled holes. When the deck is carpeted, it can be difficult to find them again. I should have anchored the legs with some additional 90-degree framing brackets I had, which I'll use later to mount them to the main platform, but even with just the deck screws, they're fairly sturdy when they're installed. I had planned to build a frame out of 2x2s for the water jug. The idea was to hold it securely and have the spout poking out the back. However, I failed to account for the handlebars of my mountain bike. I ended up just scrapping the frame after I had already cut and assembled the pieces. After scooting the jug around in the space a while, I found that strapping it down next to the C-pillar has the weight balanced nicely and allows the greatest flexibility for storing things around it. After I secured the water jug, I set to affixing the shelf to the main platform. I used the framing brackets to hold the leg steady. For the leg that sits closest to the exterior wall of the van, I made a T out of 2x2s and wedged it into the cup holder. I attached 3 freestanding 2x2 posts secured by a couple of 90-degree brackets I got from the original cage idea. I also pre-drilled a hole in the bottom and filled it with a 2.5-inch decking screw. My dad also happened to have an unused automotive storage net lying around that was the perfect fence for the top of the shelf. I secured the net with a few screws at either end, and after the fact added a hook to the middle post to keep the net up. After filming, I removed the seat platforms and stuck my bike in the back to go riding. I love the extra storage space the shelf affords and how easy it is to access all my riding gear. I'm looking forward to finishing this up and getting some use out of it. Thanks for joining me this week. See you next time.